10 Unknown Facts About UFC. The promotion company, which has become increasingly popular in recent years, is the UFC, which is the world's most famous mixed martial arts promotion company. Despite its high profile and broad appeal, there's a lot more interesting information about the UFC that fans don't know. 1. The UFC almost didn't exist. Due to strict rules, opposition from politicians and media personalities, the UFC almost didn't exist. In 1996, Senator John McCain famously referred to the sport as human cockfighting and called for it to be banned. However, the UFC succeeded in overcoming this opposition and is continuing to grow as a result of implementing rule changes and security measures. 2. It was initially marketed as a style vs. style tournamento. It was marketed as a competitive tournament in which fighters of different martial arts backgrounds could compete against one another to identify the best style of fight when UFC first started up in 1993. But when the sport developed, fighters started to incorporate techniques from a variety of disciplines, resulting in modern mixed martial arts. 3. The first UFC event had no weight classes or time limits. There were no weight categories or periods in the initial UFC event, which took place in 1993 in Denver, Colorado. It led to a series of incredibly disparate combats in which smaller fighters had been matched up with much bigger opponents. Weight classes as well as deadlines have been introduced for later events with a view to promoting fairness and safety. 4. The UFC was once banned in several US states. As has been pointed out, in its first years the UFC was subject to a great deal of opposition, and some United States states are banning it. The bans have been lifted, and the UFC is now able to spread its reach into further parts of the world by implementing rules changes and working towards an image improvement in the sport. 5. The UFC has had a controversial history with drug testing. In many sports, the UFC has a history of controversy over drug testing. In the past, there were accusations of widespread steroid use among fighters, and the UFC was criticized for not doing enough to combat the issue. But in order to guarantee a level playing field, more stringent protocols for drug testing have been introduced over the past few years by the UFC. 6. The octagon was originally a trademark term. The name Octagon was originally trademarked by the UFC, meaning that it would not be possible for any other MMA promotion company to use a similar structure. Other companies then began to use those cages for their events after the expiry of the UFC's patent. 7. The UFC was once owned by casino owners. Zuffa, a firm that was most closely controlled by casino owners Lorenzo Fertitta and Frank Fertitta since 2001, has been the owner of the UFC between 2001 and 2016. 8. The UFC has had several celebrity owners. More than $4 billion of the UFC's value was purchased by an investor group in 2016 that included a number of celebrities, such as actor Mark Wahlberg, guitarist Adam Levine, and talk show host Conan O'Brien. 9. The UFC has had some high-profile crossover fights. In recent years, there's been a number of big mixed martial arts crossover fights where MMA fighters have taken on boxers or athletes from different sports. The fight between UFC fighter Conor McGregor and boxing legend Floyd Mayweather Jr. last year was one of the most notable examples. 10. The UFC has its own video game franchise. Apart from its live events and television broadcast, the UFC has also developed a video game series which allows fans to simulate their own mixed martial arts fight in order to play as their favorite fighters. The UFC had continued to evolve and develop, drawing new audiences as well as broadening its appeal worldwide despite the opposition from politicians, media figures, but also some of its fans. Whether you're a die-hard fan or a casual observer, these 10 unknown facts about the UFC offer a glimpse into the organization's past, present, and future.